In this video, I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know about burnout. I'll give you the definition of burnout, burnout statistics, the causes of burnout. I'll let you know the risk factors and the signs of burnout, the 5 stages of burnout, how to prevent burnout, and if you are burnt out yourself, I'll let you know how to recover from burnout. Now, my name's Chibs. I'm a stress and a burnout specialist and accredited mindfulness facilitator. I work with individuals and organizations providing practical mindfulness and mental fitness tools to reduce stress, reduce the risk of burnout, and improve your ability to get more done in less time. And some of you might know me as one of the meditation instructors and narrators on the Calm app. Now, before we get into the session, I want to begin by briefly telling you where my interest in burnout began. Now, the year was 2015, and I've been in Australia for about 10 years. My career as an entrepreneur was going from strength to strength. I lived in one of the most exclusive apartment blocks in Sydney, overlooking the Opera House, overlooking the Harbour Bridge with 360-degree views of the city. I had my convertible Mercedes in the garage, the Rolex on my wrist, and I regularly traveled around the world, business and first class, in my tailor-made suits with 40 staff across Sydney and the Philippines, and the companies that I owned were turning over millions of dollars each year. Now, everything was perfect apart from 3 problems. 1, I was stressed. 2, I was depressed. And 3, I didn't want to be here anymore. Now, you've probably guessed that my story has a happy ending, but it really does highlight an important point. Burnout is no joke. It's a legitimate condition and it's a potential disaster for individuals, families, and organizations. Now, had I had the tools then that I have now, I would have noticed the signs that I was on the way to burnout, and I could have done something to prevent it. Work-related burnout is a significant problem for the economy. Now, Deloitte's 2015 Workplace Burnout Survey, they observed that 77% of US professionals had experienced burnout at some point in their lives. In 2018, Gallup got similar results. A quarter of workers felt burnt out either very often or always, and an additional 44% felt burnt out occasionally. Now, since COVID, rates of burnout appear to be rising, especially since many companies have had to cut staff, with the remaining workers often required to do more with less and often encouraged to be online and available for longer than they had been in the past. Add to that the increase of hybrid working, and many more workers are working from home. So perhaps unsurprisingly, 37% of employees now report working more than before COVID. So what is burnout anyway? Well, I'm a stress and a burnout coach, and while burnout includes many of the same symptoms as stress, I'm looking for 3 specific feelings that differentiate burnout from stress. 1, overwhelming exhaustion. 2, a lack of enthusiasm and increased negativity and cynicism towards your job. And 3, a decreased ability to perform your job. And Gordon Parker's also added 1 more, which is cognitive impairment. Now, often burnout can result in depressive symptoms such as sadness or a lack of hope. I mean, it did in my case, but it can also lead to a whole load of negative emotions and even physical symptoms. So we've got emotions like frustrations, anger, irritability, annoyance, maybe anxiety, agitation, that kind of stuff. Then there's also physical feelings of stress such as headaches, stomach issues, body pains, insomnia, heart palpitations. And it can also increase your potential for abusing alcohol or drugs or even food. And I can fully relate. When I was burning out, I felt physically and emotionally exhausted. I couldn't sleep. I was cynical. I was detached from reality. I was almost paranoid, thinking that none of my employees or partners cared about me or the business. And I really felt like I'd lost about 30 IQ points. I just wasn't able to think clearly or make decisions like I used to. I was waking up in the middle of the night with heart palpitations. I was taking prescription meds to get through the night. It really was an awful feeling, and it seemed like there was no light at the end of that tunnel. Now, that definition that I gave you as to what burnout is, that's pretty specific to work-related burnout. I'm going to give you two more definitions that will add a bit more generality to the idea of burnout. Now, the first definition is from Pines and Aronson, and they emphasize the exhaustion part of burnout. So they say that burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. Okay? So it's a state of physical, emotional, mental exhaustion caused by long involvement in emotionally demanding situations. And the definition from Freudenberger is another one which highlights the sense of dejection that tends to be at the core of burnout. So Freudenberger says, burnout is a state of fatigue or frustration brought about by devotion to a cause or a way of life or relationship that failed to produce the expected reward. So as you can see, burnout is more than just feeling stressed or overworked. It's a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by excessive workload or prolonged stress. It occurs when we feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet the demands of life. Now, it's most often problems at work that cause burnout. However, it can also appear in other areas of life, such as parenting, caregiving, and even in relationships. And I'll address these in a later section. So what causes burnout? Well, too much workload, too much stress, of course. Well, kinda. If we go back to Freudenberg's definition of burnout, so burnout is a state of fatigue or frustration brought about by devotion to a cause that failed to produce the expected event. All right. So in that case, the reward part of that definition is what's important here. And reward doesn't just mean financial reward, because we can get many different types of reward for our efforts. So our efforts could be benefiting our family or our community. We could be getting recognition for what we're doing, or we could be doing something that's highly aligned with our values. So even if we're not getting money for what we do, we might still be getting well rewarded. Now, I actually saw burnout in action a little while ago. So me and my friends, we run a community wellness event each Saturday. We kind of do boot camp, yoga, and we do meditation down on Maroubra Beach. Okay, so it's completely free for the community. We've been doing it for years. We were happy to donate our time because we loved what we were doing. So we then decided to step up our game, right? So we rebranded and we changed our name to the Good Deed Crew. And instead of simply doing what we did for free, we insisted that everyone that came down to our sessions would have to do a good deed in the community as payment, right? So I don't know, buy a stranger a coffee, do some shopping for a neighbor, pick up some trash from the beach, that kind of stuff. Really cool. And as an example of one of the things that we did, we ended up teaming up with a local charity, and we got everyone who came to the session to bring down and donate food and toiletries for the local women and girls shelter, right? Really good stuff. So we were putting a lot of effort into it. We were on the phone to each other every day. We were coming up with new ideas on how we can get our community to do more for itself, right? How can we grow the community? We were going to have good deed crews on every beach in Australia, and we were loving every minute of it, right? The community was into it. There were really great vibes, and there were loads of smiling faces wherever we went. It was really, really amazing. And then the council said that we weren't allowed to be doing what we were doing because we didn't have a permit, so we had to stop, which absolutely knocked the wind out of us. And I could literally see the life force draining from the other members of my team. Now, lucky for me, I'm very protective over my workload. So I make sure that I don't take on too much. And I also have the tools to manage my mindset and my stress. And I kind of see challenges like that as an opportunity for me to practice my techniques. But all of a sudden, the workload and the reward were out of balance, right? So if we're getting a big reward and we've got a high workload, so we've got big reward here, whether it be extrinsic reward like money or an intrinsic reward like community or recognition or appreciation, then our workload can be up here and we're not going to feel burnt out. We're going to feel energized. But if the reward starts to come down, and we start to feel unappreciated, we feel undervalued, then all of a sudden that workload is going to feel significant and we're going to feel burnt out. So it's almost like the reward is fuel for the workload. All right. So if it's up here, we're getting lots of fuel. If it's down here, we're not getting much fuel. Now, most people associate burnout with excessive workload. All right. Too much stress. So the most obvious place to look at when we're making a change is with the workload. All right. So we reduce the workload and we reduce the risk of burnout. However, while workload is an important place to look, to get a complete understanding, we need to investigate 6 areas, and workload being just one of those 6. And we'll do that in the next section. Burnout researchers have identified 6 areas that are particularly relevant to burnout. And if there's a mismatch or an imbalance in any of these 6 areas, then the risk of someone burning out increases. So the 6 areas are workload, control, reward, community, fairness, values. Now, the most obvious one that we're all tuned into is workload, all right? So when we have a workload that matches our abilities and our capacity, we can comfortably get our work done. And we have enough time in our day for rest and recovery so that we can find that equilibrium, find that balance. When we feel chronically overloaded day after day of never having enough time, then our opportunity to restore that balance doesn't exist, and we increase our risk of burnout. Okay, the second area we look at is control, or more accurately, the perception of control. So if you feel like you lack autonomy in your role, if you feel as though you don't have access to resources, if you don't have a say in decisions about deadlines, or you've got no control over various elements that might impact your work life, then this can take a toll on your mental health, and this can put you at a greater risk of burnout. So it's that feeling, that perception, that sense of not being in control that is the key here. Reward. So reward, if the extrinsic reward like salary or bonuses or benefits packages, and intrinsic rewards like appreciation or positive feedback, if they don't match the amount of effort and time that you're putting into your work, then you're likely to feel that what you're putting in isn't worth what you're getting out. And that's going to chip away at your soul and it's going to increase the feelings of cynicism and detachment that are associated with burnout. So number 4 is community. So who do you work with, or who do you work around? How supportive and how trusting are those relationships? If no one cares about you or how your day is going, if no one listens to you, if no one's engaged with you, then your risk of burnout increases dramatically. Now, as you can imagine, a big issue and a big focus for organizations that I work with is how to improve community and engagement within teams now that so many of us are working from home or doing that hybrid remote working. Now, remote working can take away our whole community in some cases and can take some of us totally out of balance if we're not careful. Number 5 is fairness. So do we believe that we receive fair and equitable treatment? So for example, do we get acknowledged for our contributions, or do other individuals get praised and our work goes unnoticed? Do other members in the team get regular deadline extensions or extra help or additional resources when we don't? So it's that feeling of fairness or injustice. So the more we feel unfairly treated, the greater our risk of burnout. And finally, values. And in particular, is there a mismatch in values between you and the job that you're in? So if you highly value something that your company doesn't, then your motivation to work hard and persevere in your job or your task is likely to drop. So if you're a vegan and you're working in customer service for a vegan market, then you're going to be able to tolerate a much higher workload than you will be if you're a vegan working in customer service for a chicken factory, for example. Now, that's an extreme, maybe a silly example, but you can see from that example that we need to think very carefully about how important it is to match our values with those of the organizations. Okay, and we need to do that at the start before we even take on a role. Because values tend to be deeply ingrained in both individuals and in organizations. So really, you need to carefully take into consideration when applying for new jobs or when we're starting new careers. Now, I used to be an HR manager and recruitment was my area of expertise. And if values weren't aligned, there was very little chance of a sustainable long-term working relationship. And a little pro tip, if you can't find a role that's in alignment with your values and you desperately need a job, or as an employer, if you can't find someone who's in alignment with your organization's values and you need to fill the role ASAP, just be honest with each other. Sign a short-term contract. Focus, pay the contractor well, get the job done, and in the meantime, find a suitable permanent staff member. Now, we don't have to have complete fulfillment over each of the 6 areas to prevent burnout, okay? So for example, a massive workload probably won't lead to burnout if we feel well rewarded for it financially or with recognition, or if the job that we do is highly aligned with our values, or if we have a strong, supportive, fun community around us. That being said, we should aim to find that equilibrium across all 6 dimensions whenever possible. Okay, so who is at risk of burnout and what are the signs? We're going to look at that in the next section. So, who's at risk of burnout and what are the signs? Well, a quick and a straightforward way to determine whether you're at risk of burnout is to take the burnout quiz on my website. It will take you 2 or 3 minutes and it will give you an indication of where you are and if you are at risk. And if you are at risk, what you need to do. But in general, those that are statistically most at risk, unsurprisingly, are those with particularly high stress jobs. So a few of the riskier professions are lawyers, nurses, doctors, social workers, teachers, and police officers. But as we saw from Deloitte's 2015 survey, 77% of US professionals have experienced burnout at some point in their lives. So any job can be a source of burnout. Almost 4 out of 5 of us will experience burnout at some point in our lives. And searches on Google about mental health and burnout were at an all-time high back in 2021. So now more than ever, we all need to be alert to the signs, both for ourselves and for friends, family, and work colleagues. So let's talk about the 5 stages of burnout. So since burnout appears to be on the rise, it's important for us to understand and recognize the stages of burnout. Now, we tend to commonly observe the following 5 stages. So we've got the honeymoon phase, onset of stress, chronic stress, burnout, habitual burnout. So the honeymoon phase. When we undertake a new task or a new project, we often start by experiencing high job satisfaction, abundant energy, and loads of excitement and creativity. Now, this is especially true of a new job or at the beginning of a business venture or in a relationship, of course, hence honeymoon phase. Now, entrepreneurs are particularly susceptible to the honeymoon phase. Now, I was starting up new ventures and projects every month, so I know this feeling well, and back in the day, I became almost addicted to it. Now, in this first stage of burnout, you might start to experience a bit of stress, right? But it's going to feel like good stress, excitement. So it's important at this very early stage to start implementing positive coping strategies to support your well-being. Now, mindfulness is the best strategy that I know, but there are others. If we create good coping strategies to deal with the stress at this stage, we can continue in this honeymoon phase almost indefinitely. Now, the symptoms or the signs of the honeymoon phase are job satisfaction, happily and willingly taking on more responsibility, unbridled optimism, commitment to your work, the desire to prove yourself, lots of creativity, and high productivity levels. The second stage of burnout is onset of stress. Now, during this stage, you start to notice that some days are more difficult than others. You might find that you don't have quite as much optimism as you did at the start, and you might notice a few unpleasant stress symptoms coming up. So maybe the inability to focus, irritability, lack of sleep or reduced sleep quality, lower productivity, anxiety, avoidance of decision making, changes in appetite or diet, tiredness, headaches. Now, if you haven't got any well-being strategies in place, it's important to start now, the onset of stress stage. The further we go without addressing the problem, the harder it will be to implement a strategy, because you'll start to feel worn down and you'll start to feel that there's no time for anything, including looking after yourself. The third stage of burnout is chronic stress. Now, at this stage, there's a noticeable and significant change in your stress levels. So where you were once experiencing motivation, you're now experiencing stress on a near daily basis. So the symptoms and signs of stage 3 burnout might be similar to those in stage 2, but they're going to be a lot more intense. So as well as the stage 2 symptoms, stage 3 burnout might involve missed work deadlines or targets, persistent tiredness, physical illness, procrastination, resentfulness, social withdrawal from friends and family, maybe anger or aggressive behavior, a cynical attitude, and increased use of alcohol or drugs or caffeine or other kind of addictive coping mechanisms. Now, stage 4 is burnout itself, and this is where symptoms reach a critical level and it becomes increasingly difficult to cope with life. Now, we're all going to have our own limits of what we can tolerate, and for some of us, this journey to burnout will be slower than others, but it's critical that you seek help at this stage, because the longer you remain at this stage, the more damage you're going to be doing to your nervous system, and the more challenging it will be to bring yourself back to a healthy state. Now, symptoms of stage 4 burnout could be feelings of emptiness, obsession over problems at work or in life, a pessimistic outlook on everything, maybe self-doubt, chronic headaches, stomach or bowel problems. Sometimes there's a desire to isolate yourself, wanting to be away from work, wanting to be away from friends or family. And then the final stage of burnout is habitual burnout. And this means that the symptoms of burnout are so ingrained in your life that you're going to experience significant mental, physical, and emotional problems. It's still very much possible to recover from stage 5 burnout, but it's a much, much longer road, and it's less likely that you'll be able to recover from this stage of burnout and still remain productive in your current job. So most people at this stage will need to leave their job and focus on recovery. So symptoms of stage 5 burnout are chronic sadness, depression, and chronic mental and physical fatigue. Now, 2 questions that I get asked often are, is burnout different from stress? And is burnout different from depression? So I just want to take a minute to address those 2 questions. Now, stress and burnout are absolutely intertwined. However, burnout is an extended period of stress that feels like it will never end. So if stress is in short bursts, or if it's tied to a specific goal, it's not likely to be harmful. If that stress feels never ending and comes with feelings of emptiness and hopelessness and apathy, then it's likely to indicate burnout. Now, when it comes to depression, the difference between depression and burnout isn't always easy to see. And compared to other mental disorders, burnout is most similar to depression. So burnout and depression, they share many of the same symptoms, including concentration issues, memory issues, sleeping problems, and feelings of exhaustion. But the main difference is that depression is more generalized. It will usually affect several areas in life, such as family and friends and hobbies and work, right? Now, burnout can eventually influence all those other parts of life similar to depression, but it's likely to occur at a much later stage. Depression, on the other hand, can have a quick and significant influence on several parts of life very early on. So it can really suck the joy out of everything that you do, while burnout will limit itself to work usually, certainly at the earlier stages. So in my case, it was hard to say whether I was depressed or not, because work was such a significant part of my life. I'd be working 12 or more hours a day. And when I wasn't working, I was numbing myself and staying away from friends and from hobbies. So the only thing that I did outside of work really at that time was look after my daughter. And that was the one thing that kind of kept me present and kept me motivated to keep going. Now, thankfully for me, that depressed state didn't flow into my time with her. So that's why I'm not 100% sure whether I was clinically depressed at the time or not. All right. So what can we do to prevent burnout? And if we do get to that burnout stage, what can we do to recover from burnout? We'll look at that in the next section. How do we prevent burnout and how do we recover from burnout? Well, the first thing that we need is awareness, all right? We need the ability to recognize the warning signs. Once we're aware of the signs, we can do something about it. So let's assume that we've become aware of some early warning signs and we want to prevent burning out, or perhaps we've missed the warning signs and we find ourselves in full-blown burnout and we need to find a way to recover. What can we do about it? Well, when I'm working with clients, self-care is my number one weapon of choice in the fight against burnout. And the reasons for this is that self-care is 100% within our control. I'm going to talk about work-related ways to prevent burnout later, but often we don't have control in this area. Things usually have to change at the team or organizational level. But even if we do have complete control over our work situation, we should still focus on self-care as we make improvements to our work environment. Make sense? Now, it's very boring. There's nothing sexy about it. You've probably heard this all before, but what we have to do in no particular order is prioritize good sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress reduction or relaxation. If we have access to nature, even better. Now, of course, my number one stress reduction technique is mindfulness meditation, but there are plenty of other ways to relax. Yoga, breathing, reading, napping, listening to calming music, going for a walk, hugging our loved ones or hugging our pets, whatever, right? There's plenty of things to do. But the advantage of mindfulness as a stress reduction practice is that it not only improves your mental health and relaxes you, it also improves your focus, your concentration, and your productivity, which should be music to the ears of the strivers among you. I managed to bounce back from my burnout by learning to do things that fill me up. So now, if I notice that I'm, and you're going to have your own signals, you're going to have your own indications. But for me, my indications are if I notice that I'm feeling resentful or irritated, or I'm having trouble sleeping through the night, or I'm having trouble making decisions, then that's my personal cue for me to change my behavior immediately. I need to step up my healthy habits and I need to take a bit of time away from trying to get things done. So my phone will go straight into airplane mode. I'll step away from the computer and I'll reset. I'm now in the habit of recharging the battery before the device completely switches off. Another way of looking at it is I'm now in the habit of rebooting the computer when it starts to get glitchy, right? So I don't want to wait until my computer completely hits the bed before I do something about it, right? I get in there early interventions. Now, the other thing that we need to do is we need to reach out to others. Social contact is one of nature's best antidotes to stress. And talking to someone, especially face to face, talking with someone who's a good listener, that's one of the fastest ways to calm down your nervous system. Now, if you have a choice, choose someone that's a good listener and isn't judgmental. It's not important that this person fixes your problem or tells you what you need to do. They just need to listen. And limit your contact with negative people. When you're burning out, you're vulnerable to negativity. So if you're hanging out with people who complain a lot, they'll tend to drag you down. They'll tend to drag down your mood and outlook even further than it already is. And you can connect with a cause or a community group that maybe means something to you. That's unashamedly one of the main reasons why I've been part of, doing my community events as part of the Good Deed crew back in the day. It gives me access to like-minded people to talk to and connect with. And it's so important for our mental health, especially for the more introverted among us. All right, so we've talked about self-care. let's talk about what we can do in the workplace. Now, a question that I get occasionally asked at the start of my coaching is, should I quit my job? And my answer is, maybe, but not just yet. Sometimes quitting is the only option. And in my case, it really felt like life or death. So in my case, I don't even think it was even a choice. I had to quit my company cold turkey. But in the majority of cases, we can try a few things first. We can try implementing self-care and stress reduction practices. We can try speaking up about our concerns, or we can try and restructure our work environment. Now, these three strategies are less risky and can often produce the best results. Now, when I'm looking for ways to restructure my client's work environment to prevent burnout, I'm looking across those 6 areas of work life that we talked about before, right? So I look at workload, control, reward, community, fairness, and values. So let's go through each of those in turn. All right, workload. The most intuitive way to address burnout is to look at the stress of your workload. We can keep it uncomplicated and simply reduce the amount of work that we do. Or we can work on our time management and we can plan our work better. We can prioritize our work better. We can schedule regular breaks. We can start and stop work at set times. We can adjust our hours. Or we might work from home rather than in the office, or work from the office rather than from home. If there are any people pleasers out there, then you're going to be particularly challenged by these next suggestions. So other things that we can do: set clear boundaries about when we work, when we're contactable, when we check emails, and so on. And we can learn to say no to work. Now, understandably, many of us find the idea of saying no or drawing boundaries at work challenging, which is one of the additional benefits of mindfulness practice. Mindfulness allows us to be comfortable in the discomfort, so we can have uncomfortable conversations with bosses and co-workers much more easily, helping us to create those boundaries. And another thing we can do to ease our workload is let go of perfectionism. So is that report good enough, or do I need to keep working on it until it's perfect? Easier said than done, but if we can let go of perfectionism, we can dramatically reduce our burnout. The next area we look at is control or autonomy. Now, usually there's an imbalance in our perception of control and the reality. And the more stressed we are, the more helpless we tend to feel. Now, mindfulness is a great tool for assisting with this because it allows us to step back and view our situation from a distance. So if we find ourselves feeling out of control, we should step back and we should ask ourselves, what exactly is it that's causing me to feel this way? So for instance, does our boss or do our co-workers contact us at all hours of the night and day, making us feel like we always need to be on call? Are the goalposts or the priorities within the workplace constantly shifting so we can never get ahead? Or maybe is the support we receive or the resources we get allocated, are they unpredictable, making it impossible to know how difficult our job is going to be from day 1 to day 2? So once we've stepped back and we've asked these questions, we then ask ourselves, what can we do to shift this situation? So perhaps we can discuss the issue with our boss to establish better boundaries, maybe not responding to messages 24/7. Could we maybe come to an agreement that certain priorities will remain constant? Or could we get a commitment to receiving more resources when we need them? Now, there are usually areas that we can make changes to and areas that won't change no matter what we say or do. So we make changes where we can, and that will increase our feelings of autonomy, help to protect us against burnout, and we accept the things we can't change. The next thing that we look at is reward. Now, if the rewards for your job, whether they be financial, emotional, or even spiritual, if the rewards don't match the amount of effort and time that you're putting into them, then you're going to be at risk of burnout. Now, when this happens, you want to really look within and figure out exactly what you would need to feel properly rewarded. So it could be a raise or a promotion, or perhaps you need more positive feedback and maybe one-on-one time with your boss, or perhaps you take advantage of the rewards that you've already been given and haven't taken, like holiday time, for instance. The amount of people that haven't taken holidays still astounds me. So think about how you can be rewarded so that what you're doing, so that the effort that you're putting in feels worth putting in. Make sense? Okay, another area we look at is community. The better our community that we work with, the more trusting and supporting our colleagues are, the more protection we have against burnout. Now, in many cases, we don't have the ability to choose our colleagues or our clients, but we can help to improve the dynamic. So we can take it on ourselves to do simple things like reaching out to colleagues and asking them how their day's going, or sending an email or a text to say how much you've appreciated their report or presentation. Or if difficult feedback or conversation needs to happen, you can commit to communicating with your colleagues in a respectful, kind manner. But I'm not going to lie, community is a very difficult one to nail as an individual. Burnout is contagious, and once a team or an organization is burnt out, it's very difficult to change the dynamic as an individual team member. I've definitely had successes with companies on an organizational level, but as an individual, if you've done all you can and others can't improve or don't want to improve the relationships, then it might be time to consider a job change. There is one instance where community is well within your control, and that's when the feeling of community has been lost because people have started to work remotely. All right, so that's happening a lot at the moment. Yeah. Now, in those cases, it's much easier to take the lead and create opportunities to improve relationships. So you can organize virtual lunches or coffees. You can organize social events. There's lots of creative and proactive ways that you can engage the community around you. The next thing we look at is fairness. Now, much like control, fairness is somewhat based in perception and somewhat based in reality. So your level of stress will determine how much reality there is in there. So if you're highly stressed, everything will seem unfair. When we're stressed, what's happening is the nervous system is constantly triggered. So we get into a fight or flight, and that's when our black and white thinking kicks in. So things are either completely fair or completely unfair. Our brain isn't able to see the middle ground, isn't able to see the nuance. So if we feel that our contributions aren't getting acknowledged, or other people are getting praise where our work gets unnoticed, or we never get extensions or additional resources, or we never take days off work and other people are taking lots of days off sick, we're going to feel unfairly treated, and this is going to increase our feelings of burnout. So here we need to start by speaking up. It's incredible how many of our problems are caused by miscommunication. Sometimes people just aren't aware of their biases or favoritism. Sometimes there really isn't a bias, and once you speak up, you might find that your good behavior is being noticed and the bad behavior of others is being noticed too. And sometimes, and here's a dirty little secret, people are lazy. People just won't take action unless they're asked. So as a boss, you might know that something is unfair, but it's easier for you not to do anything. So if no one's speaking up, why do anything about it? So speak up. We cannot, and probably should not, expect other people to do what's fair. One reason why it's hard to speak up is that many of us are uncomfortable expressing our needs, and we find these conversations difficult. So again, this is why mindfulness is a perfect tool to have in the background, because mindfulness helps us to become comfortable with discomfort. We can become comfortable having these difficult conversations. Now, the final area that we need to look at is values. If you highly value something that your company does not, then your motivation to put your heart and soul into your work will significantly drop. The effort you put in won't sit right with your conscious or your subconscious mind, and you'll burn out. Now, values are deeply ingrained, both in individuals and in organizations. You've got very little chance of changing values of an organization. Value change really needs to come in at an organizational level. So much like community, it's unlikely that you can do much if there is a big mismatch in values. So it's really important right at the start of your career to match your values with those of the organization. Now, once again, it's helpful to have that helicopter, that mindful view from afar. So take a step back and ask yourself, has the company shifted its values? Does the organization seem open or likely to change? And if after that reflection, there is a big mismatch, then it might be time to consider changing jobs. Now, up until now, we've been talking about work-related burnout. But what about burnout that's not related to work? Well, we'll look at that in the next section. Now, the language that I've been using and the examples that I've been giving in the previous sections are very much related to work. But of course, paid work isn't the only source of chronic stress or burnout. Now, burnout is associated with your role. So that could be your role as an employee, your role as a boss, or your role as a business owner. Or it could be your role as a parent or a partner or a caregiver or a community leader. Now, everyone who has a role can experience exhaustion or overwhelm or secretly believe that they're a failure in their role. So parental, relationship, and caregiver burnout are legitimate conditions, which shouldn't surprise us. You know, as a father, I know that being a father is a job. In fact, it's probably a far more important job than my job. You know, we often have to work extremely hard to be a good parent, a good partner, or a good caregiver. Now, stereotypes and stigma, particularly related to parenting, can often make those suffering with non-work related burnout feel as though they are to blame for their challenges. Now, this type of burnout tends to be less noticed because of the added feelings of guilt. And that means that people often hide their struggles from others. Now, wherever it stems from, burnout can have severe consequences if left untreated. Burnout can often feel unbeatable, never-ending, with no light at the end of the tunnel. But the sense of overwhelm is a signal, not a life sentence. And I'm talking from intimate experience here, both in my own experience and the experience of my clients. By bringing awareness and understanding to the signs and the causes of burnout, by implementing self-care strategies and by implementing work intervention strategies, the brutal experience of burnout can be a turning point. That catalyst that launches you into a happier, healthier, more sustainable career. And I say career, but really I mean life. You know, your career might be a very important part of your life. And for some of you, it might be the most important part of your life. But it's your life that you want to be happy, healthy, and sustainable. Now, discussing your challenges openly with friends, family, or a mental health professional is often the first step to addressing the issue and avoiding adverse outcomes. And if you're not struggling yourself and you notice a loved one struggling with burnout, then offer a friendly ear, gently encourage self-care and offer to reduce their mental load by helping them with tasks outside of work. Now, if you are struggling with burnout or chronic stress and you want some tools to get you back on track, then please visit my website where I've got plenty of resources. And if you're having difficulty finding your way out, or you suspect that you may also have mental health conditions such as depression, then please make sure that you seek professional treatment. There are plenty of us out there that can help. All right, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next video.